Hello and welcome to the Metal Pack Pod, the industry's leading podcast for the global metal packaging industry. The Metal Pack Pod is brought to you by the Metal Packager, the number one digital resource for the global metal packaging market. With over 7,000 monthly users in over 140 countries globally, be sure to check us out on metalpackager.com. I'm your host, Alex Fordham, and today we welcome Chris McKenzie, Chief Operations Officer and Chief Marketing Officer for SLAC International. During the conversation, Chris shares his views on the latest industry developments, including whether the aggressive growth we have seen in the beverage can sector is truly sustainable, and the ongoing challenges to do with inflation and supply chain issues globally. Chris also shares some more information about the company's innovations, including the advent of its digital mini-line technology, which is taking advantage of the growing trend in digital printing. But before we begin the episode, we must give special mention to our sponsors, PPG. We're proud to partner with you and thank you for supporting the Metal Pack Pod this past year. Their range of innovative and sustainable solutions enables its customers to protect and beautify the world. Now on to today's show. Hi Chris, thank you very much for joining me. Appreciate you're obviously a very busy man. We're meeting on the eve of Asia Cantech, obviously a very busy show, so if we can kick things off, I'd like to find out what you guys have got planned for Asia Cantech in Bangkok next week.
Good to see you. Sorry I'm a little bit tired, it's been a hectic journey around the Middle East and Europe over the last month. Yes, due to go to Asia Cantech starting tomorrow, heading off to Singapore, then Singapore to Bangkok. This trip started off actually with a can making summit, so it's bookends, as it were. Asia Cantech is the first one since 3 years now, I believe, and so my findings over the last year, between what I saw in Brazil with Latin Can and then Gulf Can and then the can making summit, is enormous new gathering, which is unprecedented, because people for the first time are looking to get out and see people face to face. Usually I leave the Asia Cantech to the Suzhou team, but this time we're putting an international team in there because of the COVID situation, which is still prevalent in China, as you're aware. The team which will be there will be from the United States with OKL, myself of course, the European team from Intercan, and my new international sales director, Rainer Bergfeld. And it looks to be an interesting show. We're focusing this time on the breadth of where SLAC has come in the last 5 years, the breadth of what we can supply, as well as the breadth of offices. When we talk about where we are now compared to where we were 5 years ago, I think it's important to say that we've just finished in the last couple of years some major projects. I mean, forget about what we did in Poland, where we did a complete turnkey. We've supplied body makers across all of Europe, as well as neckers and spray systems. We've supplied out of our OKL plant in Cincinnati. They've just done a fantastic job supplying 35 body makers in a record time to a plant in Ohio. We've also supplied out of our own kitty the copper systems, and then across China and Asia Pacific we've just keep growing and growing, and then with customers who are suffering. So we talked about the issues of Ukraine and the opportunities in the future, but at this point in time we're still supporting a major customer we have in Myanmar, where there's still issues which stop people travelling in there, but we've got engineers in there support them today. So, yes, are we a main player? I think we are a main player, and we're going to be here for a long time, and people need to take note of the fact that we're not going away.
Yeah, I remember in some of the press release material and just chatting anecdotally to you, it was a kind of case of with SLAC, with obviously your equipment innovations, that you've arrived, and now it seems that it's a case of you're established and you are an innovator within the marketplace. So is that really a strategy moving forward now to sort of politely assert yourself that you are a leading equipment supplier within the industry?
It is. From where we started in 2016 on the international arena to where we are now, we've now gone from being sort of a supplier who was an international company based in China to now being an international company globally recognized. We have probably the most comprehensive range of equipment for the industry, whether it be can body making or can end making or food products. Because of course we also have Karima, which specializes in the 3-piece side as well as the 2-piece ends.
Does that bring with its own pressures, having such a varied portfolio? Sometimes companies where they have just a very sort of specific skill set, specific area, it makes things simpler. I can imagine for you as a marketing professional that brings with it its own challenges as well.
No, I disagree. I mean, we do everything from, as you know, from coil to palletizer, and that optic was chosen because being a company based in China, we were seen as the new kids in the block and a threat. And so in order for us to be taken seriously by customers, we had to make sure that we didn't slot into somebody else's product range, that we were able to supply the entire range. Over the last 5 years, though, we're now in a situation where we not only do full turnkey with the full product range, but we also now do slot into other people's product ranges.
I can imagine as well, we've had sort of many conversations over Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc. in the last few years. It must be nice to get out and actually see people face to face, because it's been, especially with you being based in Australia, you must have felt like you were a little bit marooned on an island for a couple of years. So it must have been challenging, obviously trying with the increase in sort of demand within the industry as well, and the vibrancy. That must have been a challenge, certainly initially during the pandemic.
To be fair, in the initial stages of the pandemic, the technology was a breath of fresh air, because as you know, I travel extensively. In fact, in 2019 I did 10.5 months on the road, and so for 2 years to be able to be based at home and do things by technology was refreshing and quite nice to spend time with my family and my wife and my country. However, after about the first year, 2 things became evident. One is that the pressures of Zooms caused lots of pressures on people's mental issues. And we lost quite a few people because of the pressures of Zoom. It's not unfair to say that that being that sort of invasive to people is not something which everybody can do. It's what we do as travellers and directors. But in general, people don't do that on a day-by-day basis. What started off as being pleasant ended up more like manic celebrity squares. And the biggest problem we had was that, for instance, for myself, being in Australia, I would start Zoom meetings at 5 a.m. in the morning with USA. Then the daytime would be Asia Pacific, and then Zoom meetings with Europe right through until maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. So to be honest, it was more difficult and harder work than it was actually traveling, where you could close the door on the plane and say, this is my time.
Sometimes with technology, there is such thing as too much technology. I mean, I'm mindful of that as a digital business as well, that we're sort of advocating all these new forms of technology, but sometimes you are, and I've found that as well with all these Teams meetings, etc., that sometimes you're never off work as a result. When with all the travel involved, you could, as you're saying, you could have a few days out, but I think it's made people a lot more demanding. Like you would want people having a conversation and then they wouldn't answer straight away, whereas you would build in the fact that people travel extensively, so things would take time. I found that people were becoming increasingly more demanding as a result. I'm not sure if you found that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, when I started off this 30 years ago, I would be for 2 weeks lost, and then I'd turn up at a hotel, and that hotel would have a big envelope full of faxes and telexes and things which people don't understand these days.
Are you nostalgic for that, would you say?
No, because it had its own problems. I mean, a lot of the faxes we used to get were thermal imaging, so by the time you got them, they were just black pieces of paper. You didn't know exactly what the message was. There was certainly a pleasantness of having direction, which wasn't broken by continual, we look at today. If we look at today, we talk about technology. We've got computers. I used to have a secretary, and they took my secretary off me and gave me a laptop. I remember it was 250 kilobytes, and it did everything I wanted it to do. And nowadays, it doesn't even come to a thumb drive. I've got a mobile phone which works 24 hours a day everywhere in the world. I've got technology which just doesn't allow me to rest. That's a bad thing from the point of view of being able to rest, but a great thing as far as our job's concerned, which is being available for our customers. Because our customers are across the world, they need to be able to contact us 24/7. And I think the majority of customers do understand that people do sleep, and so they as long as they know where you are, they do tend to be fairly good about that. Going back to your previous questions though, which I didn't answer fully, it is nice to be back to face. The one thing which I've missed so much in the last 2 years is actually talking to people and being able to just engage them. And sort of all this trip has been quite pleasant. And of course, a lot of the world, Middle East, Asia Pacific, South America, business is only ever done successfully face to face. You can't do it at the end of a phone or the end of a Zoom meeting.
Within the industry, we're seeing a lot of, particularly on the global can maker side, obviously very keen on net zero targets, etc. Is that something, for somebody who travels extensively, is that something you're mindful of with the amount of time you're spent travelling, aeroplanes, etc., or do you think that's just part of the job, so to speak, or is that something as a company you're trying to maybe not scale back, but just I hate the cliche, but the hybrid model of if you're going to travel, you're doing it for a reason rather than jumping on a plane for 8 hours for a 2-hour meeting, etc., that some of you guys were doing extensively in the past. I'm just curious to know whether that has, due to COVID and obviously sustainability agendas, whether that is a factor now.
I think it's a fair point, but I think that the net zero technology is based on each end of the person. So for instance, as a company, we are working heavily towards technology that makes our products as net zero as possible. And then my anticipation is that planes, which are flying, they're working heavily as well. We certainly don't throw the amount of people we did in pre-COVID around the world on planes because of sustainability and of course because of concerns about what we've learned during this period. But I think that when it gets to some people in the companies like myself, you have to go do it. You have to do it. It's just a matter of doing your best to make it as viable as possible, as sustainable as possible, by buying carbon neutral abilities and so on.
Experience the iSense family of specialty coatings. PPG iSense Specialty Over Varnishes help beverage brands stand out on the shelf with unique effects. A tactile finish with a dynamic effect you can see and touch. A velvety, deep matte finish. A satiny smooth, medium gloss over varnish. A white base coat that makes colors pop. A bottle can and cup over varnish that enables special shapes. And a luxurious finish that shimmers and shines. Proven performance, possibilities. Learn more at www.packagingcoatings.com/iSense.
Just want to move tact a little bit. You mentioned about SLAC's innovations. I think it's probably an ideal opportunity now to perhaps introduce a couple of those. I mean, within the media of our industry, there's been, and on your guys' social media channels, about your sort of digital mini line concept and very much into the digital printing side of things, and you secured a high profile arrangement with one of the leading can makers. So yeah, just if you could perhaps fill our audience in on your developments and perhaps the exciting advent of digital print.
Yeah, digital print is a small part of what we do, but it's an important part of what we do. Back in 2016, my chairman and company owner, Xuan, kind of got sick of this belief that because we were a Chinese company that we were making copies all the time and following business as opposed to being part of it. And so the best way to deal with that was, rather than stand up on top of a building and shout, "No, we're not," is to go out there and lead. And we did that by innovation. You'll remember that back in the day we innovated with the Hexad. It was the first 6 out on on a conversion press. We've also done the Boxer, the twin ram, which has been commercialised in Europe and is being used extensively in Asia, and will be going to MetPac next year, and then going on to commercialisation trials in another major customer in Europe. Where we are with the mini line, it's an important innovation given probably what's happened in COVID is that, sort of as we went into COVID, we went into it for the craft brewer and the small manufacturer, and they were interested, but there was no shortage of cans they could get from the big boys. But over the COVID period, where this last 2 years where we've seen this massive jump forward, probably the biggest jump forward since the 70s, and certainly in my career, we've seen the situation where they can't get, for love nor money, even bright cans at high prices. And so we're seeing now that they are moving fast forward to either individually looking at digital decoration, or I use this synergy before, where I'd said to them, I think in one of my articles, that it was time for them to be like a pack of wolves, which is to run together and put their money together to produce, sort of cans which can be used for all of them. The digital mini line is still very, very important to us, and I think is still leading the field as far as the technology is concerned. When we talk about innovations, I think probably one of the biggest innovations we've made in the last sort of 3 years was that through pressure from our Chinese customers, because they couldn't buy CDL ends and ISE was beginning to rise through the crown plants, that they were losing traction in the end making industry. So they put us into a situation which we didn't want to be in, which is to take on another technology and be accused of copying again, and that wasn't the case. What we did was we decided to produce the SLAC optimized end. The SLAC optimized end has all of the same metal attributes and cost reductions that you would expect from both the CDL and the ICE, and still uses the same chuck as them. But unlike our colleagues that do that side of things, we don't charge royalties. We focus still on being equipment suppliers, not being renters.
In a recent podcast with us, we discussed this very topic. Simon Jennings, who obviously, not to put a downer on the sort of digital printing side of things, but he questioned whether the finance is stacked up for perhaps the global players to take on digital printing on a mass scale. So I was just interested on your take, whether is the advent of digital printing within the industry, is it going to be consigned to just small to medium-sized craft brewers and small run sizes? I know we are seeing some innovations in digital printing at several hundred cans a minute, but is this a trend, or is this something that's purely going to be here to stay, and it's quite an exciting theme that we can look forward to in the future?
I think even the big boys now are looking at digital printing has been an important part of their process. If we look at Crown, they've moved in with Bellox, and then Arda have bought the company in Canada, which uses the Hinterkopf technology. And of course us with Ball in South America, and where we started a long time ago to discuss global issues. In all, I think that the digital technology was designed for small runs and quick turnaround, so to make less than 50,000 runs cost effective and viable. Will it ever be used for mass production? I think Sam is exactly right. I think that in its present technology, all of them, it'll never take over from the offset, because the offset gives a cheaper and easier capex, not running cost, but capex. If somebody was to say to me tomorrow, I want to be able to move to 2,000 cans per minute digital, we can do that, because that's what we do. We innovate, and it's not a matter of it can't be done. It's just the size of the unit, and so the capex would be more expensive, but the running costs would be less. Yeah. And as I've told customers time and time again, not about digital decoration, but everything, is the capex is a one-off. Running costs are forever.
And I mean, perhaps we're getting wrapped up in these questions where, does it matter if it's on a mass scale? That we're seeing some of the reasons why this industry has grown hugely is you only have to go into for instance, here in the UK, your local Marks and Spencer or the supermarket, and the range of, say, for instance, beers, non-alcoholic beers, it's becoming like the wine market with breadth of choice, and that's really exciting. And perhaps that showcases the metal package to a whole new audience. So perhaps it doesn't matter if it's on a mass scale.
Yeah, I think I think where we are now with the small brewer, craft brewer, and small drinks. So let's not just say it's beer. It's probably the biggest jump forward since Camera in the 70s, where they moved forward with real ale, and now we're seeing more and more. I think even in where we are today, I complained because there was no English bitters when I am in London. So that there was a Guinness and the rest were all IPAs, which is fine because it's good for business for us. But those small runs, whether it be tea or juice or alcohol lemonade or beer, they're all new venues for us as an industry. And that's not taking into account what we can steal away from the glass and the PET business.
In the last few years, we have definitely seen, this industry has grown hugely, and it's been exciting times, and equipment suppliers have expanded, obviously new plants globally, not just in the US, but also in Europe as well. But recently the announcement that Ball have closed two plants in the US, potentially because of external factors, the sort of runaway inflation globally, issues with the war in Ukraine. Is that perhaps a warning sign for the industry, or is this just Ball sort of stabilising, and because they're obviously looking after market share, they're also share price, etc.? So I'm just interested, playing devil's advocate here, is this perhaps a warning sign, or is this just notable because the industry's grown at such a level, particularly on the two-piece beverage side, that things can't go on like that forever?
Let me see. When I first started this 3 decades ago, we were used to cyclical supply, and so we'd have 3 years of good business, then 3 years of dip, and then 3 years, and then 3 years. And so we always used to plan innovation or spare parts and service to make sure that we stayed alive during that dead 3 years. I'm now in this situation where I haven't seen a dip in the industry for 15 years. It's risen. Where are we today? The last 2 years, as you say, has been this huge jump forward. Has it stagnated? Has it fallen over? No, I think as I've travelled and I've spoken to a lot of the main players in the industry, I think it's just come to the point now where the main players and the decision makers and the financial people are just saying, let's take a breather. Let's just see where we are. Let's see where we want to go over the next two or 3 years.
It's always been labelled, and I say on this podcast a lot, about how the industry is conservative, very traditional. Is that to its detriment sometimes, that perhaps this industry hasn't quite taken advantage of the exciting growth that we've seen, and perhaps this period now is just almost the industry let's just see how things are going, rather than really taking the industry forward? I'm just curious. You've got a lot more years in the industry than I have, so I'm just, and you've seen the highs, you've seen the lows. So yeah, I'm just curious to say. I don't want you to play clairvoyant, but it'd be interested to hear your view on where we are now and perhaps for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, if you look where we've gone in the last 3 decades. We've gone from stability of sort of the 12 ounce, 16 ounce, or the 330/500 ml can, and then we moved through the old 209 end, which now sort of we're down to 200s, never mind 202s. If we look at cans, sort of the industry moved impatiently to sleek and slim, super sleek, and now if I look at the Middle East, which I've just come back from, I was talking to one of my friends there, and he says that they're looking to see a major change in the sugar tax, where it may be linked to per milliliter. So once it goes to per milliliter, then we're not going to see trends where the cans are going to get bigger, or the PET bottles are going to be bigger, or multiple sales. They're going to go to smaller cans, because the smaller the can, the more cost effective they are. If we look at what Crown and Ball and Ardagh and all the others have done with digital decoration, they've embraced it. They've not shooed it away. No, I think the industry has, throughout the decades, embraced change to increase their business. I do feel that as an industry, though, a metal industry, we need to work together, because the story of plastics has been lost over the COVID situation. Because with COVID, and I put my hand up, I did the same. We just bought big bottles wherever we could because we needed to have things in the house in case we were locked down. But now we've moved out of that era. We need to remind the younger generation that plastic is bad.
Is that potentially an issue with inflationary pressures? You only have to stick on the radio, on the internet, on your phones, and you're hearing of, certainly yesterday here in the UK, we're looking at inflation of almost 10.5%. That's going to put pressure on people's wallets, and the choice between a sustainable package or something that's cheaper, is that going to be something that the industry is going to be mindful of, or going to be affected by? Or do you think young consumers are passionate about the environment, sustainability, so that they are going to have that message of metal packaging?
Well, the quick simple answer to that is yes, but the important thing about adversity in the global situation as it stands at the moment is that it's not the first time. We've had economic downturns, and it's not bad for business, it's good for business, because as the amount of money you can spend goes down, then you tend to say, well, I can't go to the bar, to the restaurant, I can't go to the pub, I'm just going to drink inside. So that means that our business gets better. We do tend to see that with adversity, beer goes up and beverage goes down, because the cokes and that for the children tend to be second nature, whereas the beers inside to be with friends and together put the world to rights is more important.
Absolutely. Is it too bullish? With a couple of podcasts we've done recently where individuals, won't name them here, but they've said that the industry is largely recession-proof because of the reasons you've said there. Is that perhaps a little bit too overconfident, would you say? Because we are, if you just the world events that we've seen during the past few years, it's been a crazy situation, and it's difficult to predict the future. So I'm just wondering whether we are too overconfident to say that perhaps we are recession-proof. I'm just curious what you think.
I think we're recession-proof. I don't think we're event-proof. I think generally we're recession-proof in that we've proved time and time again that throughout the recessions we're still here and we still grow. But event-wise, obviously the Ukraine situation is affecting us badly. All of our major customers have had to sell off or leave their businesses in Russia, and and obviously they're mothballed in the Ukraine. But that's affected business in a particular area and on a particular event, as opposed to a general recession.
Where there's crisis, there's also opportunity. So those mothballed plants, as you speak about, Russia, eventually they will come back and there'll be an opportunity for someone, isn't it? That's just the nature of business. For sure. And then as a for instance, we've just finished our latest turnkey project in South Korea, which was a plant which burned down to the ground. That particular plant was responsible for 70% of the slim cans for Korea. And so we had to work hard with the customer to get that up and running as quickly as possible. And we were honoured to be given the project of 5,700 cans per minute, a mega line and a standard line. And we did it beautifully. And I'll make sure that I share with you the latest video of what we've done. So, yes, there are events which are positive for all of us, as well as negatives. We talked about the industry with supply chain, inflationary pressure. What about SLAC as a business? Have you had to, cost-wise, pass those on to your customers, or have you found that tricky with what's going on in the world? Have you been suffered as a business?
I think that all of us are in the same boat. We have been, whether it's my friends at Stolly or CMB or Belvac or the plethora of people in the industry. We've all been affected badly by the shortage of chips. So I think that the bigger issue has not been passing on costs. Certainly we've seen a huge increase in the cost of steel and aluminium, as well as some presses. The biggest issue has not been the increase in costs. It's been the pressure on us as a supply chain for lead times, because the most expensive thing to a customer isn't the cost of a unit, it's downtime. And when they need something urgently, the longer they have to wait, the more it costs them. And ultimately could cost them a customer, which is the biggest cost.
And final word on supply chain. Reading one of your articles, I think it was in the Can Maker recently, quote here, so apologies in advance, but you mentioned you implore the industry to look at its supply chain and be aware of its accumulative processes from multiple sources, and if there are problems, work with them. Could you just expand on that a little bit? What do you mean by that statement?
I think that there became a point, like Zoom, there became a point over the last couple of years where suppliers became the bad guys. Because, and that wasn't specific. It was never meant to be an indicative statement of us. It was an indicative statement of the supply chain. Is that we look at lead times, we look at trying to get things out as quickly as possible because of issues with targets being given to the end user, not to our customer, but their customer. So ultimately, and I've seen this not just in the company I'm in now, I've seen it in past companies I've worked for, where we as a supplier have done our best to support our customers, and sometimes to the detriment. It's affected perhaps the ultimate quality of getting things to the customer quicker than we would have in the past. We've been not negligent, but it's been difficult to debug things within our own process within a given time. And sometimes we've had to debug it in the plant. And then, of course, doing that remotely has been even more complicated. So I don't want to quote instances, but I know that all of the companies I've worked with over the last 3 decades have all suffered the same. And what I was trying to do was I was reaching out to our customers as a supply chain to understand the pressures on us and that we aren't the bad guys. We're just suffering as badly as they are. And so when this is all over, not to cut out suppliers which they believe didn't do 100% and maybe only did 90%, but to understand why they only did 90% and to help them to get back up to 100% instead of chopping them out of their supply chain.
No, that totally makes sense. So thanks for clearing that one up. And just to finish, really, I mean, you've been in the industry a long time. You've seen the ups and the downs and travelled all over the world. Do you still have the zest for the industry that you always have? Where do you see yourself, not to put you on the spot again, but in the next few years, do you still have the enjoyment of the industry, this unique industry that you have done in the past?
I left Australia the end of September. I don't get back to Australia until the beginning of November. I'm sitting here with you in Heathrow Airport in the hotel. I said a long time ago, the day that stops being enjoyable is the day I stop doing it. And I still enjoy what I do. I sometimes miss being just a technical guy. A customer recently has asked me to help them with a couple of customers asked me to help with from my past experience on tooling and on washers and on pre-treatment and on lubrication. And it's still nice to walk into a plant and say, yes, I can still do it, and walk out and feel like a hero as opposed to just a guy who's doing his best to sell something and to be a good supplier. I do miss those days, but no, I enjoy what I do thoroughly. I enjoy the plethora of friends I've got globally because I don't have customers. I've never made customers, I've only ever made friends. And I believe that's the way that the industry should be.
Absolutely, I think that's a great way to end. So I really enjoyed this discussion, and pleasure as always, and we'll speak to you soon, Chris.
Pleasure having time with you, and thank you.